everybody, and welcome back. Alongside my Owl Will Be Okay Thursday series, I'm going to start a new series which I'm calling Alchemist Discussions. In this series, I'm going to feature guest speakers every week where we will cover different topics ranging from things that are social, political, psychological, medical, etc., and give a Jungian / psychoanalytic view and approach to the different topics that we will speak of. For the next month, I will feature classmates of mine from the University of Essex who studied or are currently studying for their masters in Jungian psychoanalytical psychology. For my first guest, I will be featuring Sheryl Brown. She is an experienced homeopathic practitioner. She has a BSc in psychology and a master's in analytical psychology. She has a passion and particular interest in having a vitalistic view towards human health in general, as opposed to a reductionist mechanistic view of physiological and psychological health. She is also an amazing person and has a deep, heartfelt passion to understand what lies beneath. And I think this particular quality that she has brought her to many truths on understanding physiological and psychological health for people. So I'm really excited for the world to hear our discussion, and she is joining us from England, so please enjoy. So when it comes to like homeopathy and I guess like using that perspective to have a different view towards like symptoms of mental illness, I guess like how does it kind of like come in?
Whereas current conventional medicine and psychology, apart from Jungian to a way, is very reductionist and mechanistic. It has no room for the psyche. Is something a bit like another physiopsychological system that has to apply to rules, whereas, as I say, I'm more vitalistic in my outlook, which was something that was prevalent more about the time that Jung was beginning to practice and before that. And that basically says that, we are a physical body that is inhabited by an indwelling spirit, vital force, prana, chi. We call it the vital force in homeopathy. And the role of this vital force is to animate and regulate the body. So it comes into being at the moment of conception and disappears at the moment of death. And we know it's energetic because you cannot measure it, you can't see it. It has to be energy form, and its energy reacts with the energy of the environment, and then translates that back into the psycho-neurological immuno system within the body. So it's that if you like, drives changes. It's a bit like the analogy of having a car. And someone in that drives the car. The car parts are all there, but until you get a human being actually driving it, it can't move. You need something to spark it off. And although Jung said, he's a scientist and he's an empiricist, he was quite vitalistic in his outlook. And, especially with that, the idea of the collective and the personal unconscious, there's something there that animates and regulates and controls. And in homeopathy, we say that what we call the vital force always attempts to maintain the body in the best state of health that it possibly can. And if it registers that there is an imbalance, a state of dis-ease anywhere within the system, then it will produce compensatory symptoms in order to attempt to rebalance. And normally that carries on without us knowing about it. So, for instance, you get too hot and you sweat. You get too cold and your hairs stand up. These are basic physiological things. So it's incredibly intertwined. You take something in that your body recognizes as being foreign. So if it's in the upper part, you vomit. And if it's gone past, it goes through your digestion really quickly with lots of squeezing of the intestines, no time for removal of fluids. So you get cramping and diarrhea. And then once the symptoms flush through, it's finished. So the symptoms stop. And that happens all the way through physiological, emotional, mental. Once the need for the symptoms has disappeared, they stop, But it's all about creating a situation where an imbalance or dis-ease can be nullified within the body.
When you say vitalistic, so that means that, does it mean like an aim towards there being a sense of wholeness within like the life force? Is that
yes, yeah, it permeates everything. It's not reductionist in that you have a head part and you have an arm part, or you have an emotional part. You have different specialists in the medical profession dealing with different parts. So, you have an emotional problem, you'll go and see one therapist. You have a mental problem, you go and see someone else. You break your arm, or you have a liver dyscrasia, you go and see another expert. So they're all treated as individuals, parts of the body, but we're whole. And anyone who's had chronic pain will know that it leads to depression. Yeah. Anyone who's had depression will know that their physical health, suffers as a result. You can't separate them out. They're all intertwined. So it's only by taking the totality of the symptoms that you're going to get a total picture of what's happening within, what state of dis-ease within. The only way you know is by the symptoms that are produced in compensation by the vital force. Jung came to recognize that when he was treating his patients at the Bergholzli. He came to realize that the symptoms that they were producing, the psychosis, the neurosis, they were compensatory for some trauma that had been prevalent in their history. There is a place for everything, but not every form of mental dis-ease needs to be medicalized.
I wanted to talk about the most common mental illnesses, which are like anxiety and panic disorders, bipolar, depression, eating disorders. So if we take the first, like anxiety and panic disorder, the symptoms of anxiety and panic usually are feelings of like nervousness, feelings of fear, feelings of being on edge, maybe even paranoia. How have you found in your practice that anxiety and panic usually tends to be symptoms due to what type of trauma imbalance?
You can think of health as being like a chain. And it'll be the weakest link that breaks. So if that happens to be physical, you'll get a break there. If you have a weakness on the mental emotional sphere, and anxiety are the symptoms that are produced, then those are going to be the symptoms that are produced. But the vital force will always attempt to produce symptoms on the least harmful level. And there is a hierarchy of symptoms. So you start off on the physical level, on the skin, and you know yourself. You can have, vast areas of the skin covered in eczema and still live a healthy life. But you have a tiny problem with your heart tissue, and that can be fatal. And that goes to the brain as well. And then that goes up through the emotions and the mental level as well. So if you've got something like panic or anxiety, it all it means that, the vital force or whatever it is having to produce compensatory symptoms on quite a deep level already. But what you usually find if you track back through the case is that this is, unless this trauma has been extremely severe, one incident, usually if you track back, then there is a history of dis-ease, of decreasing severity. People don't just get anxiety or panic out of the blue.
Right.
But because that is usually the point at which they think enough is enough, I'm going to seek some help from this, that's usually all it's focused on. So it's seen in isolation, and it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
You need to take the whole person and the whole history into account.
I know that I've heard of people who will have bipolar and can't really track down or pinpoint like a certain traumatic experience, but it seems to like run in the family. So would you say that, because I guess it's hard to prove, and like we've studied that there really isn't so much like science behind, or there's like epigenetics, which shows that, it can be passed down hereditarily or genetically. So how would that work into like having more of a vitalistic view as well? Would you say that there might have been a trauma from some ancestor that continues to be passed down?
Yeah, because as I say, in homeopathy, you can see the effects of pre-generational traumas and also diseases. So, for instance, we have what we call the miasms, which are inherited taints, defects. So the tubercular miasm, somewhere in your background, one of your ancestors had tuberculosis. You may obviously won't have tuberculosis, but you may find that you present with a weakness, that broken chain on the respiratory level, or with repeated infections. So you can inherit traits from your progenitors, and it accumulates. So if you have, say, a child who has parents who have quite high levels of dis-ease and they are born, their susceptibility is high. So they react much stronger because, if you like, their level of health is already decreased by what they've inherited. So, not only do we take the person's history, we want to know what's been going on in the background as well. And that can produce not only just physical effects, but mental and emotional effects as well. Jung talks about how neurosis, strong mental symptoms are the effects of the ego, which, the conscious state, which most of us think is us, being swamped or overcome by the unconscious, which is unconscious. We don't know about it, but it's so much larger and is so much capable of swamping the ego. And if you get a discordance between the two, then you get a state of dis-ease, which again needs symptoms to be able to compensate. A bit like viewing a negative of a photograph. It's only by viewing the negative that you can see the original picture.
Like in our society, or even more so just in conventional psychology, we're like taking the symptoms and making the symptoms the problem, and not really taking the symptoms as like a signal to be like, hey, the problem is actually beyond me. I'm just showing you the way towards it.
Yeah, it's a bit like if you have a set of dash lights on your car, and one of them goes off. So the engine failure light goes off, and it's blinking away because you've got an incipient problem down the line. That's a symptom. What conventional medicine will tend to do is, prescribe some form of treatment that takes the light bulb from the light. The problem hasn't been healed,
Right.
but the warning light is no longer on, so officially the car's okay.
That's such a good analogy. I felt like I understood a lot of things about homeopathy and I was on board with a lot of it. And then there were certain things where it made me feel hesitant because I was like, is it really possible to find a emotional, mental, psychological issue kind of embedded in every kind of sickness? Or is it just natural sometimes for sickness to just happen as a thing of nature? And how much does this put on the individual as a way to like put fault or responsibility on them? And like, I guess I always had trouble kind of finding that line where I was like, well, how much of our sickness is just natural? And then how much of our sickness can we not take it and think like, oh, I need to think more deeply into it? So I guess like kind of like my question is like, how do you kind of like decipher between like, oh, I just have a cold, and between like, wait, this is something deeper?
Yeah, and one way of looking at it is, or one question to ask is, how much does this debilitate your life?
Okay.
The odd cold here and there isn't going to debilitate your life. And but a repeated cold that goes down on your chest and you're off work for a couple of weeks with a hacking cough and you can't breathe and pneumonia, that's really going to debilitate your life. I mean, we've got an ideal example at the minute with this virus. Loads of people are coming into contact with it. Not everyone is getting the severity of the symptoms.
Right.
Susceptibility has a huge amount to pay. And it isn't just physical susceptibility. As I said before, you can have a strong emotional problem that can really weaken, your state of health, which makes you more susceptible. You take each case as an individual. I mean, a bit like Jung did. He said you cannot blanket prescribe or describe what goes on a therapy session, because each patient is an individual and they need to be treated with respect as an individual.
Renos, our teacher, he said like that even when you come into the therapy session, like not to be burdened with so much like theory and word, and to really just listen to the individual and hear about their own experience. And that a lot of also like intuition and feeling like comes into the therapy room and is such an important element.
Hahnemann, who was the discoverer of homeopathy, he said you need to be an unprejudiced observer.
Yeah.
And that was the one thing that came across from all these webinars that I've been doing over the past fortnight. You cannot go in with any conceived notions about what sort of remedy you're going to get, what you're going to prescribe, even at the beginning, even halfway through the case, until you get right down into the individual level. And then you are treating the individual as an individual. It's only then that you can begin to even think about prescribing.
Right, really find like what is the real problem to be addressed.
Yeah. What is the center of this person's disease? What brought them to this state of dis-ease at this point in their life at this time? And no two people are ever going to be the same.
Right.
You can treat identical twins.
Right. And it's different. So I think we're talking about how important it is to really get to the root of something and to see the symptoms not as something negative and not as something that you just slap a label on. It's like, okay, I have anxiety, I have depression, let me get like a pill, or staying on the surface and not going into more of the analysis of, okay, why am I experiencing these symptoms? I want to like talk about how much that can hurt a person.
And it's very common in today's society. We all want a quick fix, you know.
Right.
We don't want long term. We want a pill for every ill, and we want it now. You know, I have this depression. Give me something to make me feel better now. I'm not really interested in what's going on underneath. I just want to feel better.
Mm-hmm.
So you get a pill, or you go for your CBT, and you're taught, change your way of thinking about it.
Right.
So stop thinking about what's happening. You know, put a suppressive layer on. Now, as I mentioned before, the vital force will always produce symptoms on the least harmful level.
Mm-hmm.
If you block off that level, it's got to go even deeper.
Right.
In order to be able to produce the symptoms that it needs to heal.
So homeopathy uses not just like natural medicines, it also uses therapy, like talk therapy, or like what actual practices does homeopathy use?
The leading proponent of homeopathy at the moment is using something that we call synergy, which is matching the patient's physical symptoms or remedy picture with the ability to, by using the correct interview techniques, to go down into almost the unconscious layers.
Okay.
And so if you've done your case witnessing properly, the patient's energy changes and they start to talk a non-human language. They start talking the language of their deepest remedies. And that may be a mineral language, it may be a plant language. But if you listen carefully and you have done your work, you take them down into the unconscious layers and they start talking their remedy. And you prescribe that remedy and everything else on top slowly disappears.
What are questions that people can kind of ask themselves instead of feeling this initial push towards the more conventional approaches to psychology?
One of the caveats is, you know, are you a danger to yourself or other people? You know, I mean, I'm sure Andrew would say that, you know, if you have someone who is suicidal or having acute psychotic episodes, in those situations, you're going to need something to keep that patient safe. But once that acute episode has finished, then you need to go, my advice would be to go into therapy, you know, to find out, you know, what your individual symptom picture is, and to start working homeopathically with analytical psychology, and then seesaw. So as you improve, you very gradually, with, you know, the psychiatrist or your doctor's permission, reduce the medication. So nothing's done without, we're done too drastically, because that in itself can be a huge shock. But if you don't look at what lies beneath, and it was what lies beneath that took me into psychology and then into Essex, I want to know what's going on underneath, because you know, we don't just appear out of the blue with neuroses and severe pathology. It has to have come from somewhere. You know, my interest is post-traumatic stress. Well, there's post-traumatic growth. So these neuroses may be the unconscious shifting you out of your, you know, what you perceive, your ego perceives to be as one pathway onto another. And you aren't listening to, you know, your unconscious saying, excuse me, I'd like you to move. Excuse me, I'd like you to move. So it's like, shift.
Yeah.
So, you know, there can be many positives, but we are very reluctant as individuals to confront unpleasant stuff. So you need a therapist, someone to hold that space, so it's safe, you know, and to keep you on track and to stop you running away, so that you remain within there and it's safe to go down. A bit like, you know, when Jung was saying he sat in his chair and he allowed himself to go deeper down. You know, that as far as I can see is the part of any good therapist. And you know, analytical psychology, the only, well, one of the main differences and benefits of having homeopathy is that the remedies that we give, that if we match, are able to move the patient forward quicker than just talking will do. Okay. So, you know, it's a bit like giving you a shove or a battery charge to, you know, but it's got to match the symptom picture.
As you were talking, I was thinking about even just things that are going on right now in current events, like that, you know, people have been saying to me, they're like, oh my gosh, the world is so horrible and I can't believe this is happening, and like racism is getting worse and whatever. But if you really look at the history of our society and you know, check back all these key points and things that have happened over time and how racism is really embedded in our history, it's embedded in our system, then you see everything happening today is a symptom of this long history that is very real. And I think you can relate that to people even on a micro scale, that like what's happening today, it's not just like all of a sudden racism is horrible. It's like, no, it has been, and this is a symptom of this very long, horrible history that still hasn't been addressed, which is why this is still happening.
Yeah, that's it exactly. I mean, you know, I haven't followed the news in great detail, but, you know, that white policeman did not suddenly decide that it was okay, you know, to pick on anybody, you know, and especially a black man. He didn't do that out of the blue, you know. That's a symptom of something, you know, more diseased going on underneath. And it's being brought out, if you like, it's like an eczema or an ulcer, you know, on the body. But there has to be that tendency underneath for it to happen in the first place. I mean, you know, we did that essay, didn't we, on Wotan?
Right.
You know, I'm sure that, you know, there would have been Hitler's, you know, or Hitler equivalent throughout the centuries, but until the time was right, you know, until the psychological state of the German nation, they weren't going to listen to him.
Right.
You know, you cannot blame one person. You know, it's a society. And I just find it really interesting that, you know, we've got, you know, all the riots going on in the world, we've got the global destruction, and then we've got a genus epidemicus that is hitting people in the lungs, which is the seat of emotions. And nothing exists by itself. And it's almost like we're having to have a damn good spring clean. We're having to have a look. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people who aren't learning.
Right.
So you can see that the lessons, again, are going to have to be a bit tougher.
100%. I think like when you're speaking about the vital force, and speaking about the vital force, not just on an individual level, but also on a global level, could we say that that's pretty synonymous to like the personal unconscious and then the collective unconscious? Could we say that it's similar, or?
Yeah, no, if you think about it, you know, the collective unconscious is the collective, you know, and one of the things that really blew my mind and opened lots of doors was, initially I thought that the collective unconscious was just the human collective unconscious. But apparently it's the collective unconscious of every substance, every animal, it's all in there. So we are all interlinked. And I'm guessing if you extend that, you can have the collective unconscious of the planet, in which case, what's it trying to do at the minute? I mean, it's interesting that, you talk about the situation in America, you obviously have Trump after Obama. And then in England, we have, all the problems that's going on with our political party here. So it's not happening in isolation. You can see that there is a global situation,
right,
that's going on. One of the things I took from my conventional psychology degree was we did cultural psychology, and fabulous lecturer, and he said we tend to think in decades. The Chinese think in centuries.
Oh, interesting.
So if you take that viewpoint, sorry, the cat's destroying my paper. That's head rushing the computer. Say hello, Mal.
Oh.
She's chewing the paper. So if you look back, we are making history.
We are.
We are living through history and how we respond. But we're also, I think, being given the chance to chuck off an internal state of dis-ease that is running underneath, what's going on in
Absolutely.
all society.
Absolutely. I remember one of my friends saying, because when Trump came into power, I'm pretty sure it was around the same time that like Brexit was becoming a thing, and we were talking about how we're just like, what is going on in the world? And I was like, I'm scared that Trump is president now, and like, what is all going to change, and what is he going to change socially and regress on, which we had progressed on, specifically with like women's rights, LGBTQIA rights, and like how he was going to approach like minorities. And what my friend said to me was that what I think is going to happen with Trump becoming president is that he's going to bring darkness into light, because it's going to be right on stage for everybody to see, which is like, it's scary to think that and we see now that has happened. And unfortunately, it's invited more people to feel like there's space for them to be fascist, basically.
But if they weren't fascist underneath, they wouldn't be fascists, would they? So it's almost like it's bringing everything up to the surface. And, maybe for a few years, we have, as a society, paid lip service, equal rights for blacks, equal rights for people of different gender orientations. It's been a lip service, but it's been a palliation, a band-aid over the top. Because of these situations, we're being given a chance to really bring all these issues up to the surface, just as you would have a skin symptom, so they can really be healed.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That's such a good way of describing it. And like, it's just amazing how it relates to this whole topic of homeopathy and analytical psychology.
Well, it's micro and macro.
Exactly.
Nothing exists. And that's why I loved the Jungian stuff, because he, unlike Freud, he didn't just stop at the ego and
the sexual drive. It was like, but humans have so much more than just sex.
Yeah, and we are life, we are libido, and you can talk about, you can equate vital force and libido. I have no issue with that. And But, you know, he understood what lies beneath, and it's what lies beneath that needs treating every single time.
Absolutely. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and I hope you enjoyed the different topics that we brought up. If you have any questions or comments, please comment below. Please subscribe. If you haven't already seen some of my other videos, please take a look. I'm going to be uploading a video or two each week. And hit the like button if you enjoyed this video. And I look forward to seeing you again